Have you ever wondered what it feels like to sign away your entire life in front of 200 strangers? To watch the man you loved hand you a pen and say, just one last signature? Grace Bennett thought Christmas Eve would be dinner and champagne. Instead, her husband handed her divorce papers at the most exclusive restaurant in Manhattan, in front of everyone, while his new fiancée watched from the bar, smiling. Grace signed those papers with trembling hands, mascara running down her face, feeling smaller than she'd ever felt in her 38 years. She walked out into the snow that night believing she'd lost everything. She had no idea she was about to inherit $4.2 billion. You see, Grace's mother had been keeping a secret so big, so carefully hidden, that not even Grace knew the truth about who she really was. And that Christmas Eve divorce? It wasn't the end of Grace's story. It was the beginning of the most savage, satisfying, strategic revenge you've ever heard. Because when a broken woman discovers she's one of the wealthiest heiresses in America, and the people who destroyed her have no idea what's coming, well, that's when the real story begins. This is Grace's story. And trust me, you're going to want to hear every single word. So settle in, get comfortable, because what happens next will make you believe in justice, redemption, and the power of a woman who refuses to stay broken. Let's begin. Snow fell like broken promises over Manhattan's Fifth Avenue, covering the city in a blanket of white that made everything look clean and new. Inside Cipriani, nothing felt clean. Nothing felt new. Grace Bennett sat across from her husband at a table for two, surrounded by 200 strangers dressed in black tie and holiday cheer. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light across tables draped in white linen. A live orchestra played Silent Night near the bar, where couples slow danced and champagne flowed like water. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, snowflakes drifted past the glass, each one catching the light before disappearing into the darkness. Grace had worn the same black dress she'd worn to their anniversary dinner 3 years ago. The same dress she'd worn to his company Christmas party 2 years ago. The same dress she'd been wearing when he first told her he was tired of coming home to a woman who smelled like chalk dust and erasers. She was a substitute teacher, had been for 5 years. Before that, she'd had dreams of becoming a writer, of creating stories that mattered. But dreams didn't pay rent in Queens. Dreams didn't keep the heat on during winter. So she taught other people's children and came home to an empty apartment that smelled like loneliness and microwave dinners. Cole Sullivan sat across from her in an Armani suit that cost more than she made in 3 months. His dark hair was perfectly styled. His watch was a Rolex. His shoes were Italian leather. Everything about him screamed success, power, control. Everything about Grace screamed invisible. "Open it," Cole said, sliding a black leather folder across the white tablecloth. Grace's hands trembled as she reached for it. She knew what it was before she opened it. Had known for weeks, really, maybe months. Maybe since the day he stopped kissing her goodbye in the mornings. Maybe since the night he came home smelling like perfume that wasn't hers and didn't bother lying about where he'd been. The folder contained divorce papers. Already notarized, already dated, already signed by him. And all it needed was her signature. "Cole, not here," Grace whispered, her voice barely audible over the orchestra. "Please, not here." "Why not?" Cole's voice was loud enough that the couple at the next table glanced over. "You've embarrassed me long enough. 5 years of supporting a woman who can't even dress herself properly." Grace felt her face burn. She looked down at her dress, at the modest black fabric she'd thought was elegant, sophisticated, appropriate. Now it just looked cheap, worn, sad. "I gave you everything," Cole continued, leaning back in his chair with the casual confidence of a man who knew he'd already won. "A home, a name, a life you could never have afforded on your own. And what did you give me? Nothing. No children, no connections, no value." Grace's throat tightened. They'd tried for children. She'd wanted them desperately. But month after month, year after year, the test came back negative. The doctor said there was nothing wrong with either of them. Sometimes it just took time. Sometimes it just didn't happen. Cole had stopped trying 2 years ago. He pulled a Mont Blanc pen from his jacket pocket and dropped it on the papers like a judge dropping a gavel. "Sign it," he said. "Let's make this official." Grace looked around the restaurant. People were staring now. Some were filming on their phones, probably posting to social media already. She could see the headlines now. Wall Street executive dumps wife at Christmas dinner. Poor woman humiliated at Cipriani. The divorce that broke the internet. Come on, Grace, Cole said, his voice dripping with impatience. It's just a signature. One last wifely duty. Grace picked up the pen with shaking hands. Her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall in front of all these strangers. The ink bled slightly as she signed her name at the bottom of the page. Grace Elizabeth Bennett, not Grace Sullivan. She'd never taken his name. He'd been furious about that, said it was disrespectful, said it showed she wasn't committed. Maybe he'd been right. See? Cole said, smirking as he stood and buttoned his jacket. That wasn't so hard. He raised his champagne glass toward the bar, and Grace watched as a stunning blonde woman in a red dress approached their table. She was young, maybe 29 or 30. Her dress probably cost more than Grace's entire wardrobe. Diamond earrings sparkled at her ears. A diamond ring, not small, not subtle, gleamed on her left hand. Are we done here? The woman asked, wrapping her arm around Cole's. The car's waiting. We're done, Cole said. The woman glanced at Grace, and for just a moment, something that might have been pity flickered across her perfect face. Then it was gone, replaced by a smile that said, I won, you lost. Get used to it. Merry Christmas, Grace, Cole said as they turned to leave. Good luck with your little teaching career. They walked away together, his hand on the small of her back, her laughter echoing across the restaurant like breaking glass. Grace sat frozen at the table, surrounded by whispers and sideways glances. The orchestra had moved on to Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas. Couples danced. Waiters brought out plates of food she couldn't afford. The snow continued to fall outside, covering everything in white. She stood on shaking legs and made her way toward the bathroom, past tables full of people who looked away as she passed, past couples who held hands and smiled at each other with genuine affection, past a world that had moved on without her. The bathroom was all marble and gold fixtures and mirrors that showed her exactly what she'd become, a 38-year-old woman with mascara running down her face, wearing a 5-year-old dress, holding divorce papers that were still warm from the printer. Two women stood at the mirrors, reapplying lipstick with the casual ease of people who belonged in places like this. Did you see that? One of them said, not bothering to lower her voice. Cole Sullivan finally got rid of the charity case. I heard she was a substitute teacher when they met, the other woman replied. He practically rescued her from poverty. Well, Madison's already wearing his ring. Guess he upgraded. They laughed and left, their designer heels clicking on the marble floor. Grace collapsed against the counter, her shoulders shaking with sobs she couldn't control anymore. She'd given Cole 5 years of her life, 5 years of cooking his meals and attending his events and smiling at his colleagues and pretending she didn't notice the way they looked at her like she was something he'd scraped off his shoe. 5 years of making herself smaller and quieter and less so he could shine brighter. And this was how it ended. In a bathroom at Cipriani on Christmas Eve, listening to strangers laugh about how pathetic she was. She splashed cold water on her face and tried to repair the damage. But some things couldn't be fixed with cold water and paper towels. Some things stayed broken. When she finally returned to the table, Cole was long gone. He hadn't even paid the bill. Of course he hadn't. Why would he? That was her job now, cleaning up his messes. Grace reached for her purse, trying to calculate if she had enough in her checking account to cover a meal at Cipriani. Probably not. She'd have to put it on a credit card. Add it to the pile of debt she was already drowning in. Miss Bennett? Grace looked up to find a male server standing beside her table. He was older, maybe in his 60s, with silver hair and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. I'm sorry, Grace said, wiping at her eyes. I'll pay. I just need a minute. The bill's been taken care of, the man said quietly. What? By who? That's not important. He placed a small card beside her water glass. But this is... Before Grace could ask what he meant, he walked away, disappearing into the crowd of waiters and guests. Grace picked up the card. It was made of heavy cream-colored paper with embossed gold lettering that read, Your mother's will was a lie. Everything you think you know is wrong. Meet me at Pier 17 in 1 hour. Come alone. See? Grace stared at the words until they blurred. Her mother had died 3 years ago in a tiny apartment in Queens. There had been no will, no money, no secrets, just medical bills and an old photo album, and a woman who'd worked as a secretary her entire life and died with nothing to show for it. This had to be a mistake, or a prank, or some cruel joke someone was playing on the pathetic divorced woman crying in her cheap dress. But something in Grace's chest told her it wasn't a mistake. Something told her that on this terrible, humiliating, soul-crushing Christmas Eve, her life was about to change in ways she couldn't begin to imagine. The snow had picked up by the time Grace stepped outside. Fat flakes swirled through the air, catching in her hair and melting against her skin. She should have gone home, should have taken the subway back to her tiny apartment in Queens and crawled into bed and cried until there were no tears left. Instead, she found herself walking toward Pier 17. The streets were quiet despite the holiday. Most people were home with their families, gathered around Christmas trees and fireplaces, and dinner tables full of food and love. Grace had no family left. Her mother was dead. Her father had never been in the picture. She had no siblings, no cousins, no aunts or uncles who sent cards on birthdays or called to check in. She'd had Cole, and now she didn't even have that. The East River stretched out before her like a sheet of black glass, reflecting the lights from Brooklyn across the water. The Brooklyn Bridge glowed in the distance, its cables strung with tiny lights that looked like stars. Snow covered the wooden planks of the pier, muffling her footsteps. Grace was alone. Then she wasn't. A black Mercedes pulled up to the curb, its headlights cutting through the falling snow. The door opened, and the same silver-haired server from the restaurant stepped out. But he wasn't wearing his waiter's uniform anymore. Now he wore an expensive charcoal suit, a black overcoat, and leather gloves that probably cost more than Grace's rent. "Miss Bennett," he said, his voice calm and steady. "Thank you for coming." "Who are you?" Grace asked, taking a step back. "Why did you leave me that card?" "My name is Samuel Keene." He pulled an envelope from his coat pocket. "And I left you that card because it's time you knew the truth about your mother." "My mother was a secretary," Grace said. "She died broke in a Queens apartment. There's no truth to know." That's what she wanted everyone to believe. Samuel held out the envelope, but it wasn't true. Grace stared at the envelope like it might bite us on. "I don't understand." "Your mother's real name wasn't Elizabeth Bennett. It was Evelyn Hartwell." The name meant nothing to Grace. She shook her head. Samuel continued, patient and gentle. "Evelyn Hartwell was the heiress to Hartwell Industries, one of the largest privately held corporations in America, worth $4.2 billion. Grace laughed. It came out harsh and bitter. "That's insane. My mother worked in an office building in Midtown. She could barely afford groceries. She chose that life." Samuel stepped closer, still holding out the envelope. "She chose poverty to escape your father." "My father?" Grace's voice cracked. "I don't have a father. My mother raised me alone." "No," Samuel said softly. "She raised you in hiding. She raised you away from Nathan Hartwell." This time the name hit Grace like a physical blow. Nathan Hartwell. She'd heard that name before, seen it in newspapers and magazines, Forbes covers, Wall Street Journal articles. He was one of the wealthiest men in America, a titan of industry, a billionaire who lived in a penthouse overlooking Central Park and owned half of Manhattan. "You're saying my father is Nathan Hartwell?" Grace's hands were shaking again. "That's impossible. That's completely insane." "Open the envelope," Samuel said. Grace's fingers felt numb as she took it from him. Inside were three things: a DNA test with her name on it and Nathan Hartwell's name beside it, showing a 99.9% match. A faded photograph of a woman who looked exactly like Grace's mother, holding a newborn baby with auburn hair and green eyes, and a legal document dated 38 years ago. "Your mother was Nathan's partner in business," Samuel explained as Grace stared at the papers. "She helped him build Hartwell Industries from nothing. They were engaged to be married. Then she got pregnant with you." "And he wanted me?" Grace whispered. "He wanted her to terminate the pregnancy." Samuel's voice was gentle but honest. He told her a child would prevent a distraction, a liability. He was focused on building his empire, and nothing else mattered. Grace felt sick. So she left. She disappeared, changed her name, moved to Queens, worked as a secretary under a fake identity. She raised you away from his money, his power, his control. She wanted you to grow up knowing what real struggle felt like, what real love felt like, what it meant to earn something instead of inheriting it. Why? Grace looked up at Samuel. Why tell me this now? Why tonight? Samuel pointed to the legal document. Your mother's will had a specific clause. You inherit everything, but only under certain conditions. Grace scanned the document, her heart pounding. The legal language was dense, full of clauses and subclauses, but one section was highlighted in yellow. Grace Elizabeth Bennett shall inherit the full Hartwell estate, including all assets, properties, and controlling shares of Hartwell Industries, if and only if the following conditions are met before her 40th birthday. 1. She must be legally divorced or separated. 2. She must be earning less than $50,000 annually. 3. She must experience said divorce or separation on Christmas Eve. Grace read it 3 times. Then she looked at Samuel. My mother wanted me to be divorced and poor on Christmas Eve? Your mother wanted you to know what rock bottom felt like before you had the power to destroy people who hurt you. Samuel's eyes were kind but serious. She wanted you to be humble before you were powerful. She wanted you to suffer before you could inflict suffering. She knew that wealth corrupts most people. She wanted to make sure it wouldn't corrupt you. That's why you were there tonight, Grace said slowly. That's why you watched Cole humiliate me and didn't stop it. I've been watching you your entire life, Samuel admitted. I was your mother's bodyguard. After she died, I reported to Nathan. He hired me to keep an eye on you, to make sure you were safe, but we couldn't interfere. The will was ironclad. If we contacted you, gave you money, revealed ourselves before tonight, you'd lose everything. Grace thought about the last 5 years, the struggling, the sacrifice, the nights she'd cried herself to sleep wondering why her life was so hard while everyone else seemed to glide through effortlessly. So you just watched me suffer? Anger crept into her voice. You watched Cole break me down piece by piece and didn't do anything? Your mother's instructions were clear. Samuel's voice was pained. It had to happen naturally. You had to hit bottom on your own. Grace looked out at the dark water of the East River. The snow had turned to sleet, stinging her face. Everything she thought she knew about her life was a lie. Everything she'd believed about her mother, her past, her identity, all of it was fiction. So what happens now, she asked. Now, Samuel said, you meet your father, and you decide what kind of woman you want to be. The kind who uses power for revenge, or the kind who uses it for something more. Grace stared at the papers in her hands. $4.2 billion. Controlling shares in one of America's largest companies. A father she'd never known. A life she'd never imagined. And somewhere across the city, Cole and his new fiancée were probably laughing about the pathetic woman they'd left crying at Cipriani. They had no idea what was coming. Grace folded the papers carefully and slipped them back into the envelope. When she looked at Samuel again, something had changed in her eyes. Something hard and bright and dangerous. Take me to him, she said. Take me to my father. Samuel nodded and opened the car door. As Grace slid into the warm leather interior of the Mercedes, she caught one last glimpse of herself in the side mirror. The woman staring back wasn't the same woman who'd signed those divorce papers. That woman was gone. The Mercedes glided through Manhattan like a shark through dark water, silent and powerful. Grace pressed her face against the window, watching the city transform as they moved from the financial district toward Central Park. The buildings grew taller, the lights grew brighter. The people on the sidewalks wore furs and designer coats and walked with the confidence of those who belonged. Samuel said nothing during the drive, giving Grace space to process. She was grateful for the silence. Her mind was spinning with questions she didn't know how to ask. Questions about her mother, her childhood, the man she was about to meet, Nathan Hartwell. Grace had seen his face in magazines, stern, powerful. The kind of man who could buy companies and destroy careers with a single phone call. The kind of man who told her mother to get rid of her before she was even born. The Mercedes pulled up in front of a building Grace had walked past 100 times but never really seen. Hartwell Tower, 70 stories of glass and steel that seemed to pierce the sky. The lobby glowed with warm light. A doorman in a long coat and white gloves stood at attention. Samuel led Grace through the lobby, past marble floors and modern art installations worth more than most people made in a lifetime. They stepped into a private elevator, and Samuel pressed a button marked PH. "He's been waiting for this moment for 38 years, Samuel said quietly as the elevator rose. "Be patient with him." Grace didn't respond. She couldn't promise patience, not when her entire life had been a carefully orchestrated lie. The elevator opened directly into a penthouse that took Grace's breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the entire space, offering views of Central Park covered in snow. The furniture was elegant but comfortable, modern but warm, expensive but not ostentatious. And standing by the fireplace, silhouetted against the city lights, was Nathan Hartwell. He turned as Grace stepped out of the elevator, and for a long moment, they just stared at each other. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with silver hair and sharp blue eyes. He wore a cashmere sweater and dark slacks. No suit, no tie. He looked older than his photos, more worn, more human. "Grace," he said, and his voice cracked on her name. "Don't," Grace said sharply. "You don't get to say my name like you know me." Nathan flinched but nodded. "You're right, I don't know you, but I've been watching you your entire life." "So I've heard." Grace crossed her arms. "You watched me struggle. You watched me marry a man who treated me like garbage. You watched him destroy me piece by piece. And you did nothing." "I did everything your mother asked me to do." Nathan gestured to the walls, and Grace finally noticed they were covered in framed photographs. Photos of her at every age. First day of kindergarten, middle school graduation, high school prom, college commencement, her wedding day. She walked closer, her breath catching. These weren't surveillance photos, they were professional, carefully framed, lovingly displayed. "How did you get these?" she whispered. "Samuel took most of them," Nathan said. "Others, I hired photographers. I wanted to know you, Grace, even if I couldn't be part of your life." "Why couldn't you?" Grace spun to face him. "Why did you let me suffer?" Nathan pulled a document from a drawer in the side table. "Because of this." It was her mother's will, the same one Samuel had shown her, but this copy had handwritten notes in the margins in her mother's familiar script. "Nathan must not interfere," one note read. "She needs to know real pain before real power." Another note, "If he contacts her before Christmas Eve, she loses everything. Make him swear." "She made me sign a legal contract," Nathan said, his voice thick with emotion. "She said if I loved you at all, I'd let you grow up without me. She said wealth destroys people who haven't earned the right to have it. She wanted you to earn it through suffering." "That's cruel," Grace said. "That's your mother." Nathan smiled sadly. "She was the most brilliant woman I ever knew, and the most uncompromising. When she told me she was pregnant, I panicked. I told her to terminate. I said terrible things. Things I've regretted every day since." He walked to the window, looking out at the snowy park below. "She left that night, disappeared completely. It took me 3 years to find her. By then you were a toddler. She was working as a secretary, living in that tiny apartment. And she was happy, Grace. Happier than I'd ever seen her." "So you just left us there?" The anger in Grace's voice was hot and sharp. "I offered her everything." Nathan turned back. "Money, security, a place in the company." She said no. She said she'd made her choice. She said if I truly loved you, I'd let you live a normal life. So I did. I watched from a distance. I made sure you were safe. I paid for your college anonymously. I made sure your landlord never raised your rent above what you could afford. But I never contacted you, never revealed myself." Grace felt tears burning her eyes. "She died 3 years ago. You could have told me then. The will said Christmas Eve before your 40th birthday. You're 38. Tonight was the first night I could legally tell you the truth." Grace sank onto the leather couch, her legs suddenly weak. "Did you love her?" "More than anything." Nathan's voice broke. "She was my partner, my best friend, the only person who ever told me the truth even when I didn't want to hear it. Losing her was losing half my soul." "Then why didn't you fight for her?" Grace demanded. "Why didn't you fight for us?" Because I was a coward. Nathan sat across from her, his eyes red. I chose money over love, power over family. I thought building an empire was more important than building a life. By the time I realized how wrong I was, it was too late. They sat in silence. The city hummed below them. Snow continued to fall outside the windows, covering Manhattan in white. What did she die of? Nathan asked quietly. Cancer. Grace's voice was barely a whisper. She didn't tell me until it was too late. Didn't want me to worry. She died in that apartment surrounded by medical bills and debt. I worked 3 jobs to pay for her funeral. Nathan closed his eyes, pain etched across his face. I would have paid for everything. She didn't want your money. She wanted your love. Grace stood, suddenly furious. She wanted you to choose us over your empire, and you didn't. I know. Nathan stood too. And I've spent 38 years living with that choice. But Grace, I'm here now. I can't give you back those years. I can't give you a childhood with a father. But I can give you what your mother wanted you to have. Power, resources, the ability to never let anyone hurt you again. Grace thought about Cole, about the humiliation at Cipriani, about the woman in the red dress wearing a diamond ring. What exactly am I inheriting? She asked. Nathan walked to his desk and pulled out a portfolio. $4.2 billion in liquid assets, controlling shares in Hartwell Industries, which employs 70,000 people worldwide. Real estate in Manhattan, Los Angeles, London, Tokyo. Art collections, investment portfolios. Everything your mother and I built together. He handed her the portfolio. Grace's hand shook as she opened it. As of midnight tonight, Nathan said, you become one of the wealthiest women in America. Grace stared at these numbers. They didn't feel real. None of this felt real. And Cole, she asked? He filed for spousal support. He's claiming I hid assets during our marriage. Nathan smiled. It wasn't kind. Let him try. I have the best lawyers in the country. We'll destroy his case before it even reaches a courtroom. I don't want to just win in court. Grace looked up at her father. I want him to feel what he made me feel. Small, powerless, humiliated. Then we'll make sure he does. Nathan placed a hand on her shoulder. It was the first time he'd touched her. Welcome to your inheritance, Grace. Use it wisely. Grace looked around the penthouse again, at the photographs on the walls, at the city spread out below, like a kingdom waiting to be claimed. At her father, this stranger who'd watched her suffer because the woman they both loved had demanded it. Merry Christmas, Dad, she said quietly. Nathan's eyes filled with tears. Merry Christmas, Grace. Grace didn't sleep that night. How could she? Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Cole's smirking face, heard Madison's laughter, felt the weight of those divorce papers in her hands. But now she also felt something else. Power. Raw and electric and dangerous. At 7 in the morning, Grace stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse guest room, watching the sun rise over Central Park. The snow had stopped. The city glittered in the early light like something newborn and clean. Samuel knocked softly before entering. Your father asked me to take you shopping. He thought you might want something new to wear. Grace looked down at her black dress from the night before, now wrinkled and stained with mascara tears. I have clothes at my apartment. With respect, Miss Bennett, you don't live in that apartment anymore. Your father moved your belongings last night while you slept. You live here now. He moved my stuff without asking. Samuel smiled gently. He's been waiting 38 years to take care of you. Let him. 2 hours later, Grace found herself in a private salon on Fifth Avenue. A woman with sharp eyes and sharper scissors studied Grace like she was a sculpture that needed refining. The bone structure is excellent, the stylist said, walking around Grace. But the cut is all wrong. And this color, it's dull. We need to bring out the natural auburn, add some dimension. Grace had been cutting her own hair for years, couldn't afford salon prices on a substitute teacher's salary. Now she sat in a chair that probably cost more than her monthly rent while 3 people fussed over her. I don't want to look like someone I'm not, Grace said. We're not changing who you are, the stylist replied. We're revealing who you've always been. 3 hours later, Grace stared at her reflection and barely recognized herself. Her hair fell in soft waves around her face, the auburn rich and luminous. Her skin glowed. She looked expensive, confident, powerful. From the salon, Samuel drove her to Bergdorf Goodman, where a personal shopper named Claire waited with champagne and a knowing smile. "Your father said to spare no expense," Claire said, leading Grace through racks of designer clothes. "Let's find out who you want to be." Grace tried on outfit after outfit, power suits in navy and charcoal, dresses that hugged her curves, cashmere sweaters softer than anything she'd ever touched, shoes that made her stand taller. Everything fit perfectly. Everything felt like armor. "This one," Claire said, pulling out a Chanel suit in deep emerald green. "Try this." Grace emerged from the dressing room and stopped. The woman in the mirror wasn't a substitute teacher from Queens. She was someone who belonged in boardrooms and corner offices. Someone who could walk into any room and command attention. "We'll take it," Claire said. "And the other 15 pieces you tried on." "15?" Grace's eyes widened. "That must cost—" "Money you have," Claire interrupted gently. "Money your mother wanted you to have. Stop thinking like the woman you were. Start thinking like the woman you're becoming." By early afternoon, Grace sat in a conference room at Hartwell Industries headquarters. Her father's attorney, Victoria Reese, spread documents across the mahogany table. Victoria was in her mid-40s with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. "Your father's lawyers prepared everything," Victoria said. "As of midnight last night, you control $4.2 billion in assets. You're also the majority shareholder in Hartwell Industries, which gives you significant power over the company decisions." "What about Cole?" Grace asked. "His spousal support claim?" Victoria smiled. It wasn't kind. "Cole Sullivan is about to learn the difference between a substitute teacher and a billionaire heiress. We have evidence of financial fraud, embezzlement from his clients, and falsified tax returns. We could bury him." "What kind of evidence?" Victoria pulled up documents on her laptop. "Your father has been investigating him since you got married. He knew Cole was bad news. These show a pattern of financial crimes going back 7 years." Grace studied the documents. Wire transfers to offshore accounts, forged client signatures, shell companies in the Cayman Islands. Cole had been stealing from his clients for years. "Why didn't my father stop him?" Grace asked. "Because exposing him would have exposed your father's surveillance, which would have violated your mother's will." Victoria closed the laptop. "But now that you know the truth, all evidence is admissible. Can we use it to destroy his company?" Victoria's smile widened. "We can do better than that. We can destroy his reputation, his career, his entire life." Grace thought about the way Cole had humiliated her. The way he'd made her sign those papers in front of 200 strangers. The way Madison had looked at her with pity and contempt. "Do it," Grace said. "But I want to do more than just expose him. I want him to see me first. I want him to know what he lost." Victoria nodded. "Then let's pay him a visit." An hour later, Grace stood outside Sullivan Capital Management, Cole's investment firm in Midtown. She wore the emerald Chanel suit. Her hair was perfect. Her makeup was flawless. She looked like she'd been born to this. The receptionist didn't recognize her. "Do you have an appointment?" the young woman asked. "No," Grace said calmly, "but I own 60% of this building as of this morning, so I don't need one." The receptionist's face went pale. She picked up the phone, but Grace was already walking past her toward Cole's corner office. Grace didn't knock. She opened the door and walked in like she owned the place. Because technically, she did. Cole was on the phone, feet propped on his desk, laughing at something. He looked up, saw Grace, and the laughter died on his lips. The phone clattered to the desk. "Grace?" His voice was strangled. "What the hell are you wearing?" "Chanel," Grace said, closing the door behind her. "You like it?" Cole stood quickly, his face flushed. Where did you get the money for?" "That's not important." Grace walked to his desk, running her fingers along the polished wood. "What's important is that I just bought out your 3 biggest investors. They were very eager to sell once I showed them some interesting documents about your accounting practices." Cole's face went from red to white. "You what?" "Embezzlement is such an ugly word, don't you think?" Grace picked up a photo from his desk. It showed Cole and Madison on a yacht somewhere tropical. But accurate. You're bluffing. But Cole's voice shook. My. Grace set down the photo. Tell me, Cole, when you were forging client signatures and moving money to the Cayman Islands, did you ever think about what would happen if someone found out? I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. Grace leaned on his desk close enough to see the fear in his eyes. And so does the SEC. They received a very detailed report this morning. I'd expect federal agents within the week. This is insane. Cole gripped the edge of his desk. You're a substitute teacher. You don't have the money or the power to... I'm not a substitute teacher anymore. Grace straightened. I'm Grace Hartwell, daughter of Nathan Hartwell, heiress to Hartwell Industries, worth $4.2 billion. And Cole? She walked to the door, then turned back. You should have been nicer to me. She left him standing there, his face frozen in shock, his perfect world crumbling around him. As Grace walked through the lobby, she could hear Cole shouting behind his closed door. The receptionist stared at her with new understanding. The other employees whispered as she passed. Grace smiled. This was just the beginning. 2 days after Christmas, Cole Sullivan sat in a private booth at a rooftop bar in Midtown, trying to convince himself that Grace had been bluffing. But his hands shook as he raised his whiskey glass. 3 of his investors had pulled out that morning. His secretary had quit without notice, and a very official-looking letter from the SEC sat unopened in his briefcase. Madison Cross sat across from him, immaculate as always in a black dress and red lipstick. She looked bored. She's lying, Madison said, stirring her martini. There's no way Grace Bennett is connected to Nathan Hartwell. She walked into my office wearing Chanel and quoting my offshore accounts, Cole hissed. She knew things, Madison, things no one should know. So she hired a good investigator. Madison examined her nails. Or she's bluffing. Either way, we stick to the plan. What plan? The plan was to divorce her, take her for spousal support, and move on with our lives. The plan did not include her being a secret billionaire. Madison's eyes flashed. Keep your voice down. Cole leaned across the table. You said she was nobody. You said she'd sign the papers and disappear. You said, I know what I said. Madison's voice was ice. Plans change. We adapt. How do we adapt to this? Madison was quiet for a moment, her mind working. We destroy her credibility. We make people think she's lying. A gold digger who convinced a dying old man she's his daughter. It happens all the time. Nathan Hartwell isn't dying. Not yet. Madison smiled, and something cold moved behind her eyes. Cole stared at her. What does that mean? It means we have options. Ways to solve problems that don't involve lawyers. She raised her martini glass. To problem solving. Cole didn't toast. He was starting to realize he didn't know Madison at all, and that scared him more than losing his company. Across the bar, hidden in shadow, Grace Bennett watched them through the reflection in her wine glass. She wore a simple black cocktail dress and diamond earrings. Her hair fell in soft waves. She looked like she'd been born to places like this. Samuel stood discreetly near the entrance, his eyes tracking every move Madison made. Grace had known they'd meet here. Victoria's investigators had been following Cole and Madison since Christmas Eve. Grace knew their schedules better than they did, knew where they ate, where they slept, what they talked about when they thought no one was listening. She stood, her heels clicking on the polished floor, and walked directly to their booth. Hi, Cole, she said pleasantly. Madison. They both froze like deer in headlights. Madison recovered first, her fake smile sliding into place. Grace, that's a beautiful dress. Thank you. Grace's smile was genuine, warm, terrifying. Early Christmas gift from my father. Your father's dead, Cole said, but his voice was uncertain. One of them is. Grace pulled a business card from her clutch and dropped it on their table. Heavy cream paper with embossed gold lettering. Nathan Hartwell, Chief Executive Officer, Hartwell Industries. Beneath the printed text, a handwritten note. Grace, dinner tomorrow at 8. Looking forward to introducing you to the board. Love, Dad. The blood drained from Madison's face. You two have a lovely evening, Grace said. Don't worry about the tab. I'm paying for the entire bar tonight. Consider it a gift. She walked away, feeling their stares burning into her back. Behind her, Cole's voice rose in panic. You said she was nobody. Madison's response was too quiet to hear, but Grace didn't need to hear it. She could imagine the wheels turning in Madison's head. The calculations. The schemes, good. Let them scheme. Them. Grace was 10 steps ahead. In the car on the way back to the penthouse, Samuel glanced at her in the rearview mirror. You're enjoying this. Is that wrong? Grace asked. No, Samuel smiled. Your mother would have done the same thing. Tell me about her, Grace said. The real her. Not the woman who raised me in Queens. The woman who built an empire. Samuel was quiet for a moment, navigating through traffic. She was brilliant, ruthless when she needed to be, but kind too. She saw things other people missed. Patterns, opportunities, weaknesses. She could walk into a room and know within 5 minutes who had real power and who was pretending. How did she and Nathan meet? College. He was studying business. She was studying law. They were both scholarship kids, hungry and ambitious. They built Hartwell Industries together. She was the brains, he was the charm. They were unstoppable. What happened? Samuel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Nathan changed. The more successful they became, the more he wanted control. He started making decisions without her, undermining her in front of investors, taking credit for her ideas. And when she got pregnant with you, he saw it as a threat to everything they'd built. So she left. She left everything except you. She said you were the only thing that mattered, the only thing that was real. Samuel met Grace's eyes in the mirror. She loved you more than anything in this world. Grace felt tears prick her eyes but blinked them back. Then why did she make me suffer like this? Because suffering is how we learn who we really are. Samuel pulled up to Hartwell Tower. Your mother knew that wealth without character is dangerous. She wanted you to develop character first, to know real pain, real struggle, real humiliation, so that when you finally had power, you'd use it wisely. And if I don't use it wisely, Samuel turned in his seat to face her fully, then you become Nathan, and you lose everything that matters. Grace climbed out of the car and looked up at the tower stretching toward the dark skies. Somewhere up there, her father was probably working late, making deals that affected thousands of lives. Somewhere across the city, Cole and Madison were probably plotting her downfall. And somewhere deep inside herself, Grace felt something shift, a realization settling into her bones. She wasn't going to become Nathan. She wasn't going to let power corrupt her. But she also wasn't going to let Cole and Madison get away with what they'd done. There was a middle path, a way to have justice without losing her soul. She just had to find it. The New York Financial Summit was the event of the year. 500 of the city's most powerful people gathered at the Plaza Hotel's Grand Ballroom to network, make deals, and see who'd gained or lost power since last year. Cole Sullivan had been invited to give the keynote speech on ethics in modern finance. The irony wasn't lost on Grace. She arrived fashionably late, wearing a blood-red Oscar de la Renta gown that cost more than Cole made in a month. Her hair was swept up in an elegant twist. Diamonds glittered at her throat and ears, real ones, not the cubic zirconia she'd worn to their wedding. The room went silent as she entered. Heads turned, conversations stopped mid-sentence. People whispered behind their hands, but Grace didn't care. Let them whisper. Let them stare. She was done being invisible. Victoria Reese appeared at her elbow, immaculate in black Armani. Everything's ready. Are you sure you want to do this publicly? Positive, Grace said. He humiliated me publicly. It's only fair. She took a seat in the front row, directly in Cole's line of sight. His face went pale when he saw her. His hands shook as he gripped his notes. The moderator introduced him with glowing praise. Rising star, self-made success story, champion of ethical investing. Grace almost laughed. Cole approached the podium, clearing his throat nervously. Good evening. Tonight I want to talk about integrity in... Integrity? Grace stood, her voice cutting through the ballroom. That's rich coming from you. The room erupted in murmurs. Cameras swiveled toward her. This was already going to be on social media within seconds. Grace, this isn't the time, Cole started. Actually, it's the perfect time. Grace gestured to the tech booth. A screen lowered behind Cole, and Victoria's team pulled up the first document. Ladies and gentlemen, Grace said, her voice steady and clear, Let me show you what integrity looks like at Sullivan Capital Management. The screen lit up with financial records, bank statements, wire transfers to offshore accounts, forged client signatures, shell companies. Every piece of evidence Victoria had compiled, displayed in high definition for everyone to see. The ballroom exploded with gasps and shocked whispers. "This is a setup," Cole shouted. "Oh, she's lying. Those documents are fake." "Are they?" Grace's smile was cold. "Because the Securities and Exchange Commission has the originals. They've been investigating you for 6 months, Cole, ever since your ex-wife brought them these records." She emphasized ex-wife just enough to make him flinch. More documents appeared on the screen. Text messages between Cole and Madison planning to defraud investors. Emails discussing how to hide money from the IRS. Audio recordings of Cole coaching clients to lie about their income. The crowd's shock turned to anger. These were their clients Cole had stolen from, their money he'd embezzled, their trust he'd violated. Security guards appeared at the doors. A man in a dark suit stepped forward, holding up a badge. "Cole Sullivan, I'm Special Agent Thompson with the FBI. You're under arrest for securities fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit fraud." Cole's face went from red to white to gray. No, no, this is a mistake. Grace, tell them. Tell them this is all a misunderstanding." Grace looked him dead in the eye. "The only misunderstanding was me thinking you were a good man." The FBI agent read Cole his rights as two other agents handcuffed him. Cameras flashed, phones recorded. This would be on every news site within the hour. "Grace," Cole shouted as they led him toward the door. "You can't do this to me. I gave you everything." "No," Grace said quietly. "You took everything. I'm just taking it back." Then her gaze shifted to the side exit, where Madison was trying to slip away unnoticed. "Going somewhere, Madison?" Grace called out. Madison froze, one hand on the door. "Don't you want to tell everyone how you helped him?" Grace walked toward her slowly, deliberately. "How you forged my signatures on loan documents? How you seduced him specifically to get close to me?" Madison's mask cracked, her perfect composure shattered. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Grace nodded to Victoria, who pulled up more documents. Madison's birth certificate appeared on the screen. Her father's name, Richard Cross, former CFO of Hartwell Industries. "Your father died in federal prison," Grace said, her voice echoing in the now silent ballroom. "He was convicted of embezzling from my father's company. And you've been planning revenge ever since." A second FBI agent approached Madison. "Madison Cross, you are also under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, and identity theft." Madison's face twisted with rage. As the agent reached for her arm, she lunged toward Grace, screaming, "Your father destroyed mine. He deserved everything he got. You deserve everything you get." Security pulled her back as she thrashed and screamed, her carefully constructed facade completely gone. The ballroom erupted in chaos, people talking over each other, reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing like strobe lights. Grace stood in the center of it all, perfectly still, perfectly calm. She'd won. The room slowly broke into applause, started by one person, then spreading like wildfire until the entire ballroom was clapping. Some people were even standing. Grace had just exposed two of the city's most celebrated young professionals as frauds and criminals. She'd done it publicly, brutally, and perfectly. Victoria appeared at her side. "We should go. The press is going to want statements." "Let them wait," Grace said. "I want to enjoy this moment." She walked to the bar and ordered champagne. The bartender poured with shaking hands, clearly starstruck. "To justice," Grace said, raising her glass to no one in particular. Behind her, FBI agents led Cole and Madison through the crowd in handcuffs. Madison was still screaming. Cole was crying. Grace sipped her champagne and felt nothing. She'd expected satisfaction, triumph, joy. But all she felt was hollow. This was supposed to be the victory, the moment everything clicked into place, the moment she became the woman her mother wanted her to be. So why did it feel so empty? She set down her champagne and left the ballroom, Victoria hurrying behind her. "Grace, wait, the press?" "Handle them," Grace said. "I need air." She pushed through the plaza's revolving doors and out into the cold December night. Snow had started falling again, covering the city in fresh white. Grace stood on the sidewalk, breathing hard, her hands shaking. She destroyed Cole and Madison, exposed them, humiliated them publicly just as they'd humiliated her. But it didn't fix anything, didn't heal the wounds, didn't erase the years of pain. Her phone buzzed, a text from Samuel. Your father collapsed, Mount Sinai Hospital. Come now. Grace's blood turned to ice. She ran to the curb, flagged down a taxi, and gave the driver the hospital address. As the cab pulled away from the plaza, Grace looked back at the glowing hotel where her victory had just turned to ash. Sometimes winning feels like losing, and sometimes justice feels like revenge. And sometimes you don't know the difference until it's too late. Mount Sinai Hospital smelled like disinfectant and fear. Grace ran through the emergency room entrance, still wearing her red gown, diamonds glittering under the harsh fluorescent lights. Doctors and nurses stared as she rushed past. Samuel met her outside the ICU, his face gray with worry. What happened? Grace demanded. He collapsed at home. Severe neurological symptoms. They think it's poisoning. Poisoning? Grace's legs went weak. How? When? Slow-acting toxin, probably administered over several weeks. Samuel's voice was tight. The doctors are running tests, but they think it's thallium. Grace pushed past him into the ICU. Nathan lay in a hospital bed surrounded by machines, tubes running into his arms, monitors beeping steadily. He looked smaller than he had just days ago, vulnerable, human. Grace grabbed his hand. Dad, can you hear me? His eyelids fluttered but didn't open. A doctor appeared, clipboard in hand. Miss Hartwell? Grace nodded, not correcting the name. Your father is in critical condition. The poison has affected his nervous system, kidneys, and liver. We're doing everything we can, but the next 48 hours are crucial. Will he survive? The doctor hesitated. We're cautiously optimistic, but he's not young and the damage is significant. Grace sank into the chair beside Nathan's bed, still holding his hand. This was supposed to be over. Cole and Madison were arrested. Justice had been served, but someone had poisoned her father, and she had no idea who. Victoria Reese arrived 30 minutes later, her face grim. Grace, we have a problem. What kind of problem? Madison filed an emergency injunction from jail. She's claiming Nathan was mentally incompetent when he signed over control of the company to you. She's demanding a board vote to challenge your inheritance. Grace's head snapped up. On what grounds? She's saying he was being poisoned when he made those decisions, that his judgment was compromised, that you manipulated him. That's insane. That's Madison. Victoria sat down, her expression serious. She's been buying up Hartwell Industries shares through shell companies for months. She has enough votes to call for an emergency board meeting. When? Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Grace looked at her father, unconscious and helpless. Can they really overturn his decision? If they prove he was mentally incompetent at the time, yes. The board has the power to override his will if they believe he wasn't sound of mind. But he was fine. We spoke. He was completely lucid. We know that. But Madison has doctors who will testify otherwise. She's been planning this for a long time, Grace. This isn't just about revenge. This is about destroying the Hartwell family completely. Grace stood, pacing the small room. Madison couldn't have poisoned him. She's been in jail since the summit. She had access before that. Victoria pulled up security footage on her tablet. She visited Nathan's penthouse multiple times over the past 3 months, claimed to be a potential investor. Your father met with her twice. And she poisoned him during those meetings? We think so. The timeline matches. And we found traces of thallium in the tea service from his kitchen. Grace felt sick. While she'd been obsessing over Cole and the divorce, Madison had been executing a much bigger plan. Cole was just a pawn. Grace had been the target, but Nathan had been the real prize. What do we do? Grace asked. Victoria's smile was sharp. We beat her at her own game. The board meeting is tomorrow. We show up with evidence that Madison poisoned Nathan. We prove she's been plotting this for years, and we make sure she never sees daylight again. What evidence? Security cameras, financial records, her father's prison letters. We subpoenaed them. He wrote to her every week for 15 years, telling her to destroy Nathan Hartwell. We have everything we need. Grace looked at her father again. His chest rose and fell with the ventilator. What if we lose? We won't lose, Victoria stood. But you need to be ready for a fight. Madison isn't going down easily. Grace spent the night in her father's hospital room, holding his hand and watching the monitors. At 3 a.m., his vitals dipped dangerously low. Doctors rushed in. Grace was pushed into the hallway while they worked to stabilize him. She stood with her back against the wall, still wearing her red gown, mascara running down her face, feeling more helpless than she had since the night at Cipriani. Samuel appeared with coffee. Drink this. I can't lose him, Grace whispered. I just found him. You won't. Samuel's voice was firm. Nathan Hartwell is the most stubborn man I've ever known. He didn't wait 38 years to find you just to die now. Madison is going to take everything. The company, the money, my mother's legacy. Only if you let her. Samuel handed her the coffee. Your mother left you more than money, Grace. She left you strength, wisdom, the ability to fight when everyone counts you out. You sit. The doctors emerged an hour later. Nathan was stable again. Grace could go back in. She sat beside his bed as dawn broke over Manhattan. Through the window, she could see the city waking up, people starting their days, going to work, living their lives. Somewhere out there, Madison was planning her final attack. And somewhere deep inside, Grace felt something she hadn't felt since this all began. Clarity. Madison thought she'd won by poisoning Nathan. Thought she'd destroyed the Hartwell family at its root. But she'd made a mistake. She'd underestimated Grace. Again. The emergency board meeting was held in Hartwell Tower's 52nd floor conference room. 12 board members sat around a glass table. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of Manhattan, spreading out like a kingdom. Grace arrived at 8:45, wearing a navy power suit and her mother's locket. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun. No jewelry except the locket. No makeup except subtle lipstick. She looked professional, competent, dangerous. Victoria sat beside her, a fortress in Armani with a briefcase full of ammunition. At 8:59, the screen at the head of the table flickered to life. Madison's face appeared, broadcasting from Rikers Island. She wore prison orange but had somehow managed to look composed. Her hair was perfect. Her expression was confident. She thought she'd won. The board chairman, a silver-haired man named Robert Hayes, called the meeting to order. We're here today to address serious allegations regarding Nathan Hartwell's mental competence when he transferred control of Hartwell Industries to Grace Bennett. He looked at Grace. Miss Bennett, do you wish to make a statement? I do, Grace said. She stood facing the camera where Madison watched. But first, I'd like to hear Ms. Cross's case. Madison smiled. Thank you, Grace. I know this must be difficult for you. I'm sure you do. My case is simple, Madison continued. Nathan Hartwell was systematically poisoned over a period of 3 months. During that time, he made the extraordinary decision to name Grace Bennett, a woman he'd never met, as his sole heir. This decision was made while his judgment was severely compromised by neurotoxins affecting his brain function. A board member leaned forward. Ms. Cross, are you accusing Miss Bennett of attempted murder? I'm saying the timeline is suspicious. Grace appears out of nowhere. Nathan suddenly claims she's his long-lost daughter. Then he's poisoned. Who benefits? Murmurs around the table. Grace stayed perfectly still. Do you have proof? Robert asked. I do. Madison shared her screen. Documents appeared showing hospital records from 1986. Hartwell, baby girl, deceased at birth. Nathan and Evelyn Hartwell's daughter died 38 years ago, Madison said. Which means Grace Bennett is lying about her identity. Which means she manipulated a dying man into believing she was his child. Which means every decision he made regarding her is invalid. The board members exchanged shocked glances. Madison continued, gaining confidence. I also have forensic evidence that Grace's DNA test was falsified. She paid a laboratory $50,000 to produce false results. Another document appeared, bank records showing payments from an account in Grace's name to a genetic testing facility. Grace Bennett is a con artist, who preyed on a sick old man's guilt and loneliness, and she should be removed from this company immediately. Silence filled the room. Even Victoria looked worried. Robert turned to Grace. Ms. Bennett, how do you respond to these allegations? Grace stood slowly. She walked to the windows, looking out at the city her parents had helped build. Everything Madison just showed you is false, she said quietly. But I'm not going to waste time arguing about documents that be clearly fabricated. She turned back to the board. I'm going to show you the truth. She nodded to Victoria, who pulled up new files on the main screen. The hospital records Madison showed you are real, Grace said. Evelyn Hartwell did give birth to a daughter who was pronounced dead. But 30 minutes later, that baby started breathing. My mother bribed a nurse to hide the records and help her escape with me. She wanted Nathan to think I was dead so he wouldn't come looking for us. New documents appeared, sworn statements from the nurse, now retired, medical records showing Grace's actual birth, photos of Evelyn fleeing the hospital with a newborn. My mother spent 38 years protecting me from this world, Grace continued. She knew Nathan would find us eventually, so she built in protections. She created a will that would only activate under specific circumstances. She left clues that only someone who truly knew her would understand. More documents, Evelyn's will with annotations, letters to Samuel, instructions for finding Grace. As for the DNA test, Grace said, I didn't pay $50,000 to falsify it. Madison did, to frame me. Victoria pulled up bank records showing the payments actually came from one of Madison's shell companies. Madison Riley Cross has been planning this for 20 years, Grace said, ever since her father died in prison after being convicted of embezzling from Hartwell Industries. A photo of Richard Cross appeared on screen. Richard Cross was my father's CFO. He stole millions. He was caught, prosecuted, and died behind bars. But before he died, he wrote letters to his daughter. Letters telling her to destroy Nathan Hartwell. Letters outlining exactly how to do it. The screen filled with scanned prison letters. Page after page of hatred and revenge fantasies. Instructions on how to infiltrate the Hartwell family. Plans to seduce someone close to Grace and use them to get to Nathan. The board members stared in horror. Madison seduced Cole Sullivan specifically because he was married to me, Grace continued. She manipulated him into divorcing me publicly on Christmas Eve because she knew about my mother's will. She knew that would trigger my inheritance. And she knew that if she could poison my father and frame me for it, she could take everything. This is insane, Madison's voice came through the speakers, high-pitched and panicked. She's lying. Those letters are fake. Are they? Grace walked toward the camera. The FBI has the originals. They've authenticated your father's handwriting. They've traced your shell companies. They've found the thallium you purchased using a fake identity. Victoria pulled up final documents, purchase orders, shipping records, security footage of Madison buying poison. You forgot one thing, Grace said softly. My father's penthouse has security cameras in every room, including the kitchen where you made him tea. A video played on the screen. Madison in Nathan's kitchen 3 months ago, alone while pulling a small vial from her purse, pouring white powder into a teacup, stirring it carefully, smiling. The board erupted in shocked voices. Several members stood. One woman covered her mouth in horror. Madison's face on the screen had gone completely white. You tried to kill my father, Grace said. You tried to frame me for it. You tried to steal my mother's legacy, but you failed. No, Madison screamed. You don't understand. He destroyed my father. He deserved to die. The video call cut off as prison guards removed her, still screaming. Robert Hayes cleared his throat. I think we've seen enough. All in favor of confirming Grace Bennett as legitimate heir to Nathan Hartwell and rejecting Madison Cross's injunction? 12 hands went up, unanimous. Motion carried. Robert smiled at Grace. Welcome to Hartwell Industries, Ms. Hartwell. The board members stood, applauding. Some came to shake her hand. Others offered congratulations and support. Grace smiled and thanked them, but she felt hollow inside. She'd won, again, completely and totally, but her father was still in a coma, and winning felt like the loneliest thing in the world. Victoria touched her arm gently. You should go to the hospital. Grace nodded and left without another word. As she walked through Hartwell Tower's marble lobby, people stared, whispered. Some took photos. The woman who'd exposed Cole Sullivan and Madison Cross, the long-lost Hartwell heiress, the billion-dollar survivor. Grace felt like a ghost. She made it to the sidewalk before her legs gave out. She sat down on the cold concrete, her back against the building, and finally let herself cry. Not tears of sadness, not tears of joy, just tears of exhaustion. She'd fought so hard, won so completely. But now she had no idea what came next. A hand appeared in her vision, offering a tissue. Grace looked up to see a man in a white coat, handsome, maybe 40, with kind eyes and smile lines around his mouth. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Not really," Grace admitted. "I'm Dr. Elijah Hart. I treated your father when he came into the ER. Samuel asked me to check on you." Grace took the tissue, wiping her eyes. "Is he awake?" "Not yet, but his vitals are improving. I think he's going to make it." "Thank you." Elijah sat down beside her on the sidewalk, not caring about his expensive coat. "Samuel told me what you've been through, what you just did in that boardroom. I destroyed 2 people's lives. You stopped 2 people from destroying yours." Elijah's voice was gentle. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Grace looked at him. "I wanted justice, but all I feel is empty." "That's because revenge and justice aren't the same thing. Revenge is about making someone hurt. Justice is about making things right. What you did in there, that was justice." Grace wanted to believe him, but she wasn't sure anymore. She stood brushing off her suit. "I should get to the hospital. Mind if I walk with you? I'm headed back anyway." They walked together through the cold afternoon, 2 strangers bound together by one unconscious man fighting for his life. Grace didn't know it yet, but this chance meeting would change everything. Because sometimes the greatest victories aren't the ones we plan. Sometimes they're the ones that find us when we're sitting on cold concrete, crying on a random Tuesday. Sometimes they look like kindness when we're expecting judgment. And sometimes they look like a doctor with kind eyes who sits down beside us and reminds us we're human. Nathan Hartwell opened his eyes 5 days later. Grace was reading Goodnight Moon aloud, a children's book she'd found in the hospital gift shop. She didn't know why she'd chosen it. Maybe because she'd never had anyone read it to her as a child. Maybe because she wanted to give her father something she'd never received. And goodnight to the old lady whispering, "Hush," Grace read softly. Nathan's fingers twitched against the hospital blanket. Grace stopped reading, her heart jumping. "Dad?" His eyelids fluttered, opened. Blue eyes, cloudy with medication, focused slowly on her face. "Grace?" His voice was barely a whisper, rough from the ventilator tube they had removed that morning. "I'm here." Grace grabbed his hand, tears streaming down her face. "I'm right here." "Did we?" He coughed weakly. "Did we win?" Grace laughed through her tears. "We won. Madison's facing 30 years. Cole got 7. Your company is safe. Everything's okay." Nathan smiled, squeezing her hand with surprising strength. "Your mother would be so proud." "I hope so. I know so." He looked at her with such love it hurt. "You're exactly who she raised you to be." A doctor entered, followed by Elijah. Over the past 5 days, Elijah had checked on Nathan regularly. He'd also checked on Grace, bringing her coffee, making sure she ate, sitting with her during the long overnight hours. Grace had found herself looking forward to his visits. "Mr. Hartwell," Elijah said warmly, "welcome back." "How long was I out?" Nathan asked. 5 days. You gave us quite a scare." Nathan looked at Grace. "Tell me everything." So she did. The board meeting, Madison's breakdown, the evidence, the vote, all of it. Nathan listened with his eyes closed, occasionally squeezing her hand. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Grace," he finally said, "I need to tell you something." "What?" "I'm stepping down as CEO." Grace's eyes widened. "Dad, you just woke up. You don't need to make decisions right now. I've had 5 days to think about it in my coma or whatever that was, and I'm certain." He looked at her seriously. "I spent 38 years building an empire and losing everything that mattered. I don't want to die the same way." "You're not going to die. We're all going to die, Grace. The question is what we do with the time we have." He smiled weakly. "I want to spend mine getting to know my daughter, being a better person, maybe even doing some good in the world." What will you do? I don't know yet, but I know what I won't do. I won't waste another day chasing money and power while the people I love sit in hospital rooms praying I'll wake up. Grace felt her throat tighten. I'm not ready to run a company. Then don't. Hire someone you trust. Set it up so it runs itself. Use the money to do something meaningful. He squeezed her hand. Your mother didn't leave you wealth so you could spend your life in boardrooms. She left it so you could build the life she never got to have. Over the next 2 weeks, Grace made several major decisions. First, she hired a CEO to run Hartwell Industries, a brilliant woman named Sarah Collins who'd been CFO at a competing firm. Sarah was competent, ethical, and had no interest in corporate drama. Perfect. Second, Grace established the Evelyn Hartwell Foundation with $500 million in initial funding. Its mission, helping women escape financial abuse and rebuild their lives. Women like Grace had been. Women who needed more than sympathy. Women who needed real resources and real support. Third, she moved out of the penthouse and bought a modest townhouse overlooking Central Park. Still beautiful, still comfortable, but not ostentatious, not overwhelming. Fourth, she started therapy. Once a week, every week, working through 38 years of abandonment and 5 years of emotional abuse and 2 weeks of intense revenge fantasies that had left her feeling hollow. Her therapist asked her a question that changed everything. What do you actually want, Grace? Not what you think you should want, not what would make Cole suffer. What do you want? Grace sat in that office for 20 minutes, unable to answer. She'd spent so long focused on surviving, then on revenge, that she'd never stopped to ask herself what came after. What did she want? She started making a list. To know her father, to help women like herself, to create something meaningful, to feel something other than anger, to sleep through the night without nightmares, to wake up excited about the day ahead, to love someone who loved her back, to be seen for who she really was. That last one surprised her, but it was true. She wanted to be seen, not as Nathan Hartwell's daughter or Cole's ex-wife or the woman who destroyed Madison Cross, just as Grace. Messy, complicated, still figuring it out Grace. 6 months after Christmas, Hartwell Industries held its 50th anniversary gala at the Plaza Hotel. Grace stood on the stage where Cole had once been arrested, wearing an emerald maternity gown that showed off her 6-month pregnancy. She hadn't told anyone except Nathan, Elijah, and Victoria. But tonight felt like the right time. 50 years ago, Grace said into the microphone, my father built this company from nothing. Tonight, we're celebrating more than just business success. We're celebrating transformation, growth, second chances. She gestured to the screen behind her, where photos from the Evelyn Hartwell Foundation's first 6 months played. Women in new apartments, women starting businesses, women rebuilding their lives. My mother taught me that wealth means nothing if you don't use it to lift others, Grace continued. So tonight, I'm announcing that Hartwell Industries will donate 1% of annual profits to the foundation in perpetuity. That's approximately $40 million a year dedicated to helping women escape abuse and reclaim their power. The room erupted in applause. Grace smiled, her hand resting on her belly. My mother also taught me that the greatest wealth isn't money. It's love, family, connection. The people who see you at your worst and choose to stay. She looked at Elijah, standing at the side of the stage. He smiled at her, his eyes warm. So thank you all for being here tonight, for supporting this company and this foundation, for believing that business can be a force for good, and for reminding me that happy endings aren't about revenge. They're about becoming the person you were always meant to be. More applause, standing ovation, cameras flashing. But Grace only saw Elijah. He met her as she stepped off stage. That was beautiful, he said. Thank you for being here. Always. He placed his hand gently on her belly. How are you feeling? Terrified? Excited? Ready? You're going to be an amazing mother. How do you know? Because you've already survived what would break most people. This baby's lucky to have you. Grace leaned into him, feeling safe for the first time in months. Maybe years. They'd started dating 3 months ago. Slowly, carefully. Elijah never pushed, never demanded, never made her feel like she owed him anything. He just showed up, consistently. honestly, completely himself. And Grace had fallen for him without even meaning to. Now they were having a baby, Grace's baby, conceived during those final desperate weeks of her marriage to Cole. But Elijah had never cared about that. From the moment she told him, he'd said, "This baby is yours, and if you'll let me, I'd like to be part of their life too." So she was letting him, and it felt like the bravest thing she'd ever done. 18 months after Christmas, Grace stood on the deck of a small beach house in Montauk, watching the sunrise over the Atlantic Ocean. Waves crashed against the shore, eternal and rhythmic and peaceful. She held her daughter in her arms, Evelyn Rose, 3 months old with auburn hair and green eyes and her great-grandmother's gentle spirit. The baby cooed softly, reaching for the golden light spilling across the water. "She has your eyes," Elijah said, wrapping his arms around them both from behind. "And my mother's spirit, I hope." Grace leaned back against him, feeling completely content. "Have you thought more about the wedding?" Elijah asked. Grace smiled. "Small, just family, on the beach." "When?" "Christmas Eve." Elijah kissed her temple. "Really?" "It's when everything changed. I want to reclaim it, turn it into something beautiful instead of something painful." "I love that." They stood together, the three of them, watching the sun climb higher. The beach house had been Nathan's final gift to Grace, deeded to her shortly after he woke up, with a note that said simply, for peace. It had become her refuge, her sanctuary, the place she came when the world got too loud. The sound of a car pulling up broke the peaceful silence. Grace turned to see Nathan's Mercedes, with Samuel at the wheel. Nathan climbed out slowly, using a cane now, but looking healthier than he had in years. "Am I late?" he called. "Right on time," Grace called back. Nathan climbed the deck stairs carefully. Samuel helped him navigate the steps, then hung back to give them space. "Beautiful morning," Nathan said. "Perfect morning." Grace passed him baby Evelyn. "Say hi to Grandpa." Nathan's eyes filled with tears as he held his granddaughter. "Hi, sweetheart. I'm your grandfather, and I promise I'm going to do better with you than I did with your mom." "You're doing fine, Dad," Grace said softly. Samuel appeared at the door. "Breakfast is ready." They moved inside, a family, imperfect but whole. Nathan in his chair by the window, Elijah cooking pancakes, Samuel setting the table, baby Evelyn in her bassinet, waving tiny fists at the ceiling fan. Grace stood in the doorway watching them and felt something she'd rarely felt in her 39 years. Complete peace. After breakfast, Nathan asked to speak with Grace alone. They walked down to the beach, Grace pushing Evelyn in her stroller, while Nathan used his cane to navigate the sand. "I've been thinking about something," Nathan said. "What?" "What you said at the gala, about happy endings not being about revenge." "Still true." "I know, but I wanted to tell you something." He stopped, looking out at the ocean. "I spent 38 years thinking success meant crushing your enemies, building higher than everyone else, having more money, more power, more everything. And now I know success is sitting on a beach with my daughter and granddaughter, eating pancakes made by a man who loves you, having conversations that matter instead of deals that don't." Grace took his hand. "You're becoming a wise old man." "I'm becoming the man your mother always thought I could be." He squeezed her hand. "Thank you for giving me a second chance. Thank you for taking it." They walked in comfortable silence until Evelyn started fussing. Grace picked her up, holding her close. "Do you ever regret it?" Nathan asked. "The way everything happened? The suffering? The pain?" Grace thought about it honestly. "Sometimes, when I have nightmares about Cole, when I see my therapist's number on my phone, when I wake up at 3 a.m. with anxiety about money even though I have billions. But I wouldn't be who I am without it. I wouldn't have met Elijah, wouldn't have started the foundation, wouldn't have you." She looked down at her daughter. "Wouldn't have her." "Your mother knew that," Nathan said. "She knew suffering would make you stronger, kinder, more real than you could ever be if wealth came easy." She was right. Grace felt tears sting her eyes. "I wish I could tell her that." "She knows. Wherever she is, she knows." They walked back to the house as the morning sun climbed higher, burning away the last traces of darkness. That evening, Grace sat on the deck while Elijah put Evelyn down for the night. The ocean stretched before her, vast and endless. Stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Her phone buzzed. A news alert. Cole Sullivan released after 7 years. Publishes memoir. Grace stared at the headline. 7 years had passed. Cole was out of prison, living somewhere in New Jersey, working as a car salesman. Madison was still in year 12 of her 15-year sentence. She'd declined every interview request, lived in silence. Grace felt nothing, no anger, no satisfaction, just distant curiosity about people who'd once shaped her entire world. Elijah stepped onto the deck, handing her a glass of wine. Everything okay? Cole got out of prison. How do you feel about that? Grace thought about it. I feel nothing. He's just a person who made bad choices. Same as Madison. Same as my father used to be. Same as I could have been if I'd let revenge consume me. You chose differently. I chose healing. Grace leaned against him. That's the thing nobody tells you about revenge. It works. You can destroy people who hurt you, but then what? You're still hurt, still broken, still angry, except now you're also the person who destroyed someone else. So you save yourself by forgiving? You save yourself by letting go. Forgiveness comes later, if at all, but letting go, that has to come first. They sat together as the stars emerged. Baby Evelyn slept peacefully inside. Nathan and Samuel played chess in the living room. Grace thought about the woman she'd been 2 years ago, signing divorce papers at Cipriani, crying in a bathroom while strangers mocked her, walking through snow toward a pier where everything would change. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone Grace used to know but no longer recognized. The woman she'd become was stronger, softer, more aware of her own capacity for both destruction and creation. She'd learned that power could corrupt, but power could also heal. She'd learned that revenge felt good for about 5 minutes. Then it felt hollow. She'd learned that justice and revenge weren't the same thing. Justice made things right. Revenge just made more wrong. Most importantly, she'd learned that happy endings weren't about defeating your enemies. They were about becoming someone who didn't need enemies to feel whole. I love you, Elijah said quietly. I love you too. Ready for Christmas? He asked. Our wedding? More ready than I've ever been for anything. Because that's what Grace had finally discovered. The best revenge wasn't destroying the people who hurt you. It was building a life so beautiful, so full, so completely yours that they became irrelevant. The best revenge was living well and living free. Christmas Eve arrived with fresh snow and clear skies. The beach house glowed with white lights. 20 people gathered on the sand. Nathan, Samuel, Victoria, Sarah Collins, Grace's therapist, Elijah's family, and a few close friends from the foundation. Grace wore a simple white dress and her mother's locket. Elijah wore a dark suit and a smile that lit up the winter afternoon. Baby Evelyn, now 6 months old, sat in Nathan's lap during the ceremony, waving at the waves. The officiant was brief. Grace and Elijah had written their own vows. Grace, Elijah said, holding her hands, you walked into my life covered in mascara and red wine, sitting on a sidewalk outside your own victory. And I knew then that you were the strongest person I'd ever meet. You've taught me that survival isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up every single time. I promise to stand beside you through every fall and every rise. I promise to love you not despite your scars, but because of them. I promise to show our daughter what real love looks like. And I promise that when you wake up at 3 a.m. with nightmares, I'll be there to remind you you're safe now, you're loved now, you're home. Grace wiped tears from her eyes before speaking. Elijah, you saw me at my worst and chose to stay. You met me when I was broken and angry and obsessed with revenge, and you gently showed me there was another way. You taught me that kindness isn't weakness, that forgiveness isn't surrender, that love isn't something you have to earn. It's something you deserve just by being human. I promise to love you honestly. I promise to let you see all of me, even the parts I'm still learning to accept. I promise to build a family with you based not on perfection, but on truth. And I promise that our daughter will know what real love looks like because she'll see it every day in us. They exchanged simple gold bands, kissed as the sun set over the Atlantic, held their daughter together while waves crashed and stars emerged. The reception was casual. A bonfire on the beach, Hot chocolate and champagne, stories and laughter, and the kind of joy that comes from people who've survived storms and chosen to dance in the rain. Nathan gave a toast, his voice strong and sure. 2 years ago, my daughter signed divorce papers on Christmas Eve. She cried in a restaurant while strangers filmed her humiliation. She had no idea that moment would save her life. He raised his glass. Sometimes our worst days are doorways to our best ones. Sometimes losing everything means gaining the only things that matter. And sometimes Christmas Eve is when we get to start over. Everyone drank. Grace held Evelyn close, standing beside her husband, watching her father smile for the first time in 38 years. And she realized something profound. She'd spent so long thinking her story was about revenge, about destroying Cole and Madison, about proving she wasn't weak or worthless or small. But that wasn't the story at all. Her story was about a woman who lost everything and discovered that everything wasn't what she thought it was. Her story was about choosing healing over hate, peace over power, love over revenge. Her story was about learning that the opposite of pain isn't victory, it's grace. And sometimes the best revenge is becoming the person you were always meant to be, not because of what others did to you, but despite it. As the bonfire burned and stars filled the sky, Grace looked around at the people she loved, the family she'd built from nothing, the life she'd created from ashes. And she knew with absolute certainty that her mother had been right all along. Suffering hadn't destroyed her, it had revealed her. And the woman standing on this beach, holding her daughter and husband's hands, watching snow fall on Christmas Eve, that woman was worth every tear she'd ever cried to become. Grace Evelyn Hartwell Hart, not a substitute teacher, not a billionaire's daughter, not a victim, not a survivor, just a woman who'd learned what really mattered and lived accordingly.